Well, good evening, everybody. Good evening, Santa Cruz. Come on. Let's please give it up. Is the mic on? No? Yes? Don't worry. They'll figure it out. Please give a round of applause for Watsonville Tyco. Are we? There we go. There we go. Well, one more time. Watsonville Tyco. Good evening. I am Rob Wolf. I have the pleasure of being director of the Museum of Art and History, and on behalf of us, we're so glad to have you to the UCSC Museum, Night at the Museum, which we are co-presenting with the Humanities Institute and the Humanities Division. I will tell you, we have a long-standing relationship with the university. Our past collaborations have been highly successful, bringing scholars, artists, and community members together to think about questions that matter to all of us. Over the years, we have co-hosted exhibitions and public programs, and undergraduate and graduate students have worked with us on various interdisciplinary projects and publications. In fact, our current exhibition, Bay of Life, is up in the Solari Gallery. I encourage you to take a look at it. It is generously sponsored by THI, so thank you very much, THI. Give them a round of applause. And we have another really special connection to the Humanities Department in that we are very lucky that one of our MA trustees is the Humanities Dean, Jasmine Allender, and I have the privilege of introducing Jasmine to all of you tonight. So Jasmine Allender is the Dean of Humanities at UC Santa Cruz and a historian of photography, race, and civil rights. Beyond her published work and university service, Dr. Allender has supported and worked on numerous public history projects, including full-spectrum features The Orange Story, the prequel of Resettlement Chicago Story. Dr. Allender has been part of the team working on Resettlement Chicago Story since the beginning and acted as the project's lead academic advisor and managed the project's team of historians and researchers. Please give us a warm, warm welcome for Jasmine Allender.
Thank you, Rob. Thanks to the Museum of Art and History, of which I'm also a board member. Yep. It's so important to have museums that are willing to serve as forums and be really welcoming to these kinds of community events. Thank you also to Watsonville Tyco. I was thinking, could there possibly be a way that they could start every class? There's just no way you can't pay attention after a performance like that. Okay, so I'm here to welcome all of you. Welcome, everyone. It's incredible to see you all here for this UCSC Night at the Museum. It's an honor for me to stand before you so that we can launch a cinematic digital history project entitled Resettlement Chicago Story. If it's not clear what a cinematic digital history project is, by the end of this evening, we'll all know. I am proud to be a member of a very large team that created this project, and as Rob said, I served as the lead academic advisor and content curator for the educational website. And much of my own scholarship, including my public humanities work, has been dedicated to understanding the histories of Japanese Americans during World War II and bringing those stories and those histories to broad audiences. I want to take a few moments to thank all of our partners on this Night at the Museum event. I'm grateful to the leadership and members of the Watsonville Santa Cruz Japanese American Citizens League. Many of them are joining us this evening. And I will be welcoming Marsha Hashimoto up on the stage in a few minutes. Thank you so much for supporting this event and for the honor of having it serve as this year's Day of Remembrance program. Days of Remembrance typically fall on or close to February 19th, which marks the day in 1942, now 81 years ago, when President Roosevelt signed Executive Order 9066. That was the mechanism that enabled the incarceration of 120,000 Japanese Americans without due process and without regard for their citizenship rights. I want to take a moment to recognize all of you in the audience today who experienced the World War II incarceration or who are descendants of those who did. If you're comfortable doing so, would you please stand or raise your hands? We honor your presence, and we thank you for being here tonight. I also want to thank Special Collections and Archives at UC Santa Cruz, in particular Teresa Mora and Rebecca Hernandez, who's waving in the back. Special Collections has been selected as the permanent home for the historical records of the Watsonville-Santa Cruz JACL. Under the auspices of its new Community Archives program, Special Collections is collaborating with the JACL to ensure that the history of the Japanese American community in Santa Cruz County is preserved. If any of you might have materials, such as family papers, that might help in this effort, please feel free to contact Special Collections. And we've got information on the Community Archives program back at a little pop-up exhibit, the back of this room, here tonight, which features some documents that we have newly acquired from the Watsonville-Santa Cruz JACL, so I invite you to check those out later. In addition to that exhibit, we have two other pop-ups here this evening that I hope you saw when you came inside the building, and these showcase some of the really incredible public humanities work that we're doing at UC Santa Cruz. Watsonville is in the Heart is a community-driven public history initiative that needs applause right now. Hey, Steve. It's intended to preserve and uplift stories of Filipinx migration and labor in the city of Watsonville and the greater Pajaro Valley. And we also have here tonight Okinawa Memories Initiative, a public history project that explores the history of Okinawa, Japan from a global perspective through collaborative, community-centered storytelling. I'm really proud of the innovative, community-engaged public humanities projects we're creating at UCSC, and I'm eager to see this kind of work expand. We receive much institutional support for that work from the Humanities Institute, which is part of the Humanities Division. My special thanks to Irena Polic and Sharon Knoshita of THI, who are here tonight. Thank you. And my thanks to Jessica Guild for the tremendous effort she put into organizing this very complicated event. And I also want to thank the other event staff here, John and Juan doing the tech in the back. It's really an effort to have this kind of multimedia experience. It's really an honor for me to lead the Humanities Division at UCSC, and I know that there are lots of faculty and staff and students, and I want to acknowledge you and thank you so much for your support for being here. Finally, I am grateful to those of you here tonight who have given your financial support to THI and to the humanities. These kinds of public humanities projects and these kinds of public events are possible in large part because of your generous donations. We at THI and the Humanities Division are grateful for the support of the Helen and Will Webster Foundation and the support of Owl Family Properties. And on this day, the first day of Women's History Month, with my daughter hiding in the back somewhere and my mother in the second row, I also just want to acknowledge and thank all of the generous, fierce, community-building women, daughters, sisters, mothers in the audience this evening. Welcome, everyone. Okay, so as a little bit of a preview of tonight's program, which hopefully you all have a program. Yes, okay. We're going to invite you to join us on a tour of Resettlement Chicago Story. This project combines historically based fiction film and an educational website with highly curated archival content that allows users to go deeply into the themes that are raised in the film. Our goal with the project is to leverage this hybrid form, the emotional power and narrative storytelling of film, as well as curated primary sources, to engage audience, particularly high school and college students. After we do the film screening, you're also going to have an introduction to the educational website, and then we'll have a talk back with some of the project's creators. There will be a chance then for you to ask questions, and at that time we'll pass out note cards so you can write your questions, we'll collect them, and then bring them up to the front. Following the Q&A, we hope you'll stay with us. We have a reception, and it's night at the museum, so you have a chance to go explore the rest of the MA. So I would now like to, just before we screen the short film, it's my great honor and pleasure to welcome Marcia Hashimoto to the stage. Ms. Hashimoto is president of the Watsonville Santa Cruz Japanese American Citizens League. She'll say a few words about her late husband, Mas Hashimoto, who was a pillar of the Watsonville community and an educator in the truest sense of the word. Thank you.
Good evening, everyone, and welcome to tonight's program. We miss Moss, his physical presence, but his positive energy is with us as we commemorate the 81st anniversary of the Day of Remembrance. On behalf of the Watsonville Santa Cruz Japanese American Citizens League, I would like to thank Jasmine, the Dean of Humanities and Professor of History at UCSC, and the Museum of Art and History for hosting tonight's program. I appreciate the opportunity to speak about the historic significance of this day and about Moss's dedicated efforts to educate students, teachers, and the greater public about racism and America's concentration camps. In introducing himself, Moss would include his prison number, written on a baggage tag that I'm wearing right here. And these tags were ordered by the war relocation authorities for all incarcerees to wear as an identification tag. And Moss always put his prison number on there. So when he would give these tags out to his students and the community that graciously invited him to present the story of the incarceration of the Japanese Americans. And afterwards, many of the students would come up to him and ask him if they could put his number on their identification tag. So that was absolutely wonderful. So tonight, we have passed out tags to you with appreciation for your supportive attendance. Thank you. Following Japan's attack on Pearl Harbor, and advised by California Attorney General Earl Warren and General John DeWitt of the Western Defense Command, President Franklin Roosevelt signed Executive Order 9066 on February 19, 1942. This authorized the forced eviction of 120,000 innocent persons of Japanese ancestry from their homes in California, Oregon, and Washington, designated as the military zone. Without regard for their human and civil rights, their bank accounts were frozen within 2 days of this order, and within a week or two, they had to decide what to do with their home, their farms, their pets, and household possessions, because they were allowed to take only what they could carry to an unknown destination. Military necessity, or in today's terms, homeland security, was the justification given for the order. General DeWitt's lack of empathy was as hateful and chilling as his statement, quote, "A Jap is a Jap, and whether he's a citizen or not, he can't be trusted," unquote. Moss pointed out to his students that the word Jap was extremely derogatory. Historical studies and facts have confirmed that not one act of espionage or sabotage was ever reported or committed by the Japanese Americans during World War II. A congressional investigating committee concluded that racism, war hysteria, and the failure of political leadership led to the incarceration of the Japanese and Japanese Americans. 2/3 of the Nikkei incarcerated in remote camps were United States citizens. On February 19, 1942, constitutional rights, with its professed due process of law, was denied to its loyal citizens. That day in America's history is the Day of Remembrance. It is observed annually throughout the nation with the commitment that such an injustice not be repeated. We were persecuted because of our ancestry. We looked like the enemy. And as civil rights advocate Gordon Hirabayashi stated, ancestry is not a crime. A Day of Remembrance memorial garden and engraved marker at the Salinas Rodeo Grounds designates the site as one of the temporary detention centers. 3,586 Japanese Americans from Gilroy, Monterey Peninsula, Salinas Valley, San Benito County, Santa Cruz, and Watsonville were incarcerated in stark barracks and horse stalls that smelled of manure at this California historical landmark. After 3 months, they were relocated to a permanent American concentration camp in a desolate area of Poston, Arizona. The memorial garden and plaque were created and presented on February 19, 1984, by the 5 local JCL chapters as a tribute to the courage and resilience shown by the Japanese American community during World War II. We welcome with appreciation members of those chapters and the Memorial Garden maintenance team from Watsonville Santa Cruz chapter, who take beautiful care of the garden each and every month. Now I'd like to speak a little bit about Moss. I'm sorry, it's a little bit lengthy here. For Moss, February 19th, 1942, was a day of remembrance as a 6-year-old prisoner of war incarcerated by his own country. One day at Lynn Scott's school in Watsonville, Moss and his first grade best friend, Tony Hernandez, were enjoying recess and each other's company. And the next day, Moss was gone, absent and excluded from receiving an education, as were all the Japanese American students living on the West Coast. 3.5 years later, in 5th grade, Moss recalled his buddy Tony asking, "Hey, where were you all this time?" Moss replied, "Oh, I was at camp." Moss was behind as a 5th grader by 2 years, but rather than put him back a class or two, his teacher tutored him after school for a month until he caught up to grade level. For her kindness, Moss was inspired to become a teacher. For decades prior to World War II and for years after the war, there were many anti-Asian, anti-minority laws that created racist attitudes. Moss pointed out that in his presentations, and he cautioned students about the negative stereotyping in movies and music. In the musical South Pacific, Moss would quote the lyrics that spoke to him about how one becomes a racist. Quote, "You've got to be carefully taught to hate by the time one is 6, 7, or 8. In last week's Santa Cruz Sentinel, there was an article about the march in downtown Santa Cruz in celebration of the legacy of Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. Participating in this wonderful march were David Foster and his 6-year-old grandson, Avery. David Foster comes from a family of peace activists, and his grandson is already an experienced marcher. 6-year-old Avery was quoted as crediting Dr. Martin Luther King with, quote, helping Black people get their rights, unquote. Adding that, he said, I'm happy to be out in the warm winter sun, walking hand in hand with my granddad. If Moss were here with us today, he would say, this, my friends, is how racism is overcome. An educational event sponsored by our Watsonville Santa Cruz JCL that Moss was noted for was the 2002 reenactment, Liberty Lost, Lessons in Loyalty. Moss created 3 main topics for this program. 1, to reenact stories common to all incarcerees about the emotional, psychological, and physical stress endured in Americans' concentration camps. 2, to tell the amazing stories of patriotism and loyalty of our heroic Nisei, second generation, young men and women who served with the 442nd Regimental Combat Team, the Military Intelligence Service, and the Women's Army Corps. And they did this when their families were behind barbed wire. And 3, the third topic was to thank individuals, organizations, businesses, and churches of Watsonville for their support and welcoming outreach when we returned home. Nationally, the Quakers were the only group that stood by us throughout the war. The entire town of Watsonville and our Santa Cruz County members and friends made it possible to carry out this event that has never been replicated. Some of the cast and committee members are with us tonight, and I thank you for your support. They're sitting right here in the front. The Day of Remembrance stands as a reminder of the fragility of civil liberties in times of crisis and the importance of remaining vigilant in protecting the civil and human rights and freedoms of all people. Moss would conclude by reminding us all that there's only one race, the human race. Thank you.
Thank you, President Hashimoto. It was an honor for me to have worked even very briefly with your husband, and we're honored that he was a member of our Educational Advisory Board for Resettlement Chicago Story, and his story, you'll see, is included in the website. So I would now like to talk for a second about the team. It takes very large, complex teams to create these kinds of projects. Several members of the team are here tonight and will be able to come up on stage later for the talk back. Unfortunately, 3 of our team members won't be able to join us up on stage, but they are in your program, and I just want to acknowledge Reina Higashitani, Patrick Hall, and Catherine Nagasawa. I also now want to introduce one of our project partners, Jason Matsumoto. He is co-executive director and co-founder of Full Spectrum Features. Full Spectrum Features is a Chicago-based film production company committed to driving equity in the independent film industry. We worked together on The Orange Story, which launched back in 2017, and now on Resettlement Chicago Story, which Jason co-produced. He is also the director and primary composer for the Chicago-based music ensemble Ho Etsu Taiko. Jason.
Thank you, everybody. Thank you for spending your Wednesday, it's Wednesday, right? Yes, your Wednesday evenings with us. Just real quick, I've known Jasmine for almost 9 years, 10 years. It was mentioned earlier that she helped us out, was a huge part, was the academic advisor on our first project called The Orange Story. And I have to say that, for 2 filmmakers from Chicago to approached Jasmine, it's like high-level academic, to help us, and for her to believe in what we were doing, and for her to have been supportive of us this entire time. Full Spectrum as an organization would not be where we are today, really, without Jasmine's support. So thank you so much, Jasmine. And because I play taiko, I also just want to give a huge shout out to Watsonville Taiko Group. They were incredible, and I really feel like the resonance of the sound of the drum, this Japanese drum, it does something to connect us all, because that sound permeates your body and in like a really deep way. And so I was so glad to have opened this program with them tonight. And the second kind of connection to Watsonville Taiko is that in the film that you'll see, the fictionalized family, although they're resettling to Chicago, their backstory is that they're strawberry farmers from Watsonville. So it was doubly meaningful. Okay, so on behalf of the Resettlement Chicago Story Project team, I just want to thank and express our gratitude for the invitation to come here to present to you tonight. I think being in a space like the museum and having such wonderful partners to do this with, we are just so grateful. Full Spectrum was founded on a very simple idea. It's to amplify voices, stories, and perspectives that we don't often see on the big screen. Practically what that means is that we develop, produce, and distribute short and feature-length films. And this project that we'll present to you tonight is a very unique model in that it utilizes a fiction film to lead learners into a very robust educational experience. Over 130 people had a direct contribution to this project. There were 80 people on the film, 14 people on our academic advisory board, from academics to curriculum developers, classroom teachers, and community members. Over 30 individuals that actually had resettlement experience in their own families shared their story with us along this journey. And it was 4 years in the making. So again, being able to present tonight is a very wonderful opportunity. And as Jasmine mentioned, many of our team from the educational website is here tonight, and I'm very glad that you'll be able to hear from them. Before we begin the film, I just want to take a few moments and really reflect on the significance of us gathering here tonight. As Marcia mentioned, the Day of Remembrance is a very important commemoration in the Japanese American community. So I'm going to tell you a kind of personal story. My wife and her family, they live in this area, so between Monterey and Salinas. And over the course of visiting them many times, I've had the pleasure, I'm not from here, I'm from Chicago. I've had the pleasure to get to know their community and to hear many stories from my mother and father-in-law about their connections to the Japanese American community here. I've learned about Andy Matsui and his orchids. I've learned about the Tanamura family, and on a recent trip was introduced to Mariko and Tom Yamashita and Larry Hirahara, who kindly sat for hours with me inside the Salinas Buddhist Temple, sharing incredible pre-war and post-war stories of that temple's community. We reflected on the Buddhist minister, Reverend Bunyu Fujimura, who spent many pre-war years serving the Salinas Buddhist Temple, and also in in the 1940s helped start the temple in Chicago that my family's gone to for 3 generations. And just last night, I read an excerpt from a book about Salinas that quoted from oral histories collected from Marcia and Mas Hashimoto. Traveling to this part of the country has brought into sharper focus my understanding of my own family's history and the histories of my community in Chicago. My maternal grandfather ran a hotel for migrant farm workers in Stockton, California, before removal and incarceration. And my paternal grandmother grew up in Santa Maria, just down the coast, which is a place that I one day hope to visit. And all my grandparents were detained in horse stalls at the famed Santa Anita racetrack before being incarcerated at Gila River in New Mexico, Poston in Arizona, and Rower in Arkansas. I tell you this to make a point that although this project is about resettlement in Chicago, it is reflective of the lives of so many Japanese and Japanese Americans who came through Chicago and other resettlement cities during those tumultuous years after incarceration. There are endless intersecting lines that we as Chicagoans and others who were forcibly migrated to the East and across the Midwest can connect back to places like Watsonville, Salinas, Monterey, and Santa Cruz. We hope that those of you who stood earlier, those who experienced firsthand or generationally the trauma of removal, incarceration, and resettlement, see a thread of connection to your life in this project. The educational themes expand well outside of Japanese American incarceration, and we hope that everybody in this room can see the relevance and maybe even the direct connections to your own family or community story in this country. This is ultimately an American story. So thank you very much for being here to commemorate the Day of Remembrance with us, and thank you for letting us share this project with you.
I have the distinct honor of getting to join you from Full Spectrum Features, where I am the Director of Education and Research. So my job tonight is I get to give you a tour of our learning website. So where we have you entering here is just from our homepage on fullspectrum.education. But this is the portal into the actual project website here. So now that we've watched a short film together, I will take you through this tour, which alongside the film, this immersive learning website comprises what we call this cinematic digital history project. So we start here on the home page, and we're greeted by the three protagonists who hopefully you recognize by now. We have Sam, the grandfather figure, Mary in the red sweater in the middle, the teenage daughter, and then her mother, Kimie, on the right-hand side. So we can do the Start Here button on the right-hand side, and we go immediately into a wheel that kind of introduces you to the backstory of the Yamamoto family. I'm going to go ahead and quiet the background music here just so we can all hear one another okay. But we go through these wheel cards, and you get to see a little bit of the Yamamotos and how they started out in Watsonville, not very far from here, right, as strawberry farmers. We know that they were forcibly removed from their home and incarcerated in Poston, there in Arizona, as you can see on the small map. And then we are told that toward the end of the war, the Yamamotos are permitted to leave camp and find some place to start over, so long, of course, as they agreed to reject their Japanese language, culture, and traditions. So they chose Chicago to be their new home, as did about 20,000 other Japanese and Japanese Americans leaving camp. Clicking on the next section of the wheel, we are introduced to the film viewing experience. So you can click on the play button here, and you are taken into the Able Player video player. But since we just watched the film, I'm going to go ahead and close out of this, and it will take us into the landing page, where we are given an explanation that we can choose to go all the way back to 1950 Chicago and visit Mary at her high school, which is a forthcoming scene that you can look forward to returning to on your own later. You can also visit Kimie in her office and Sam at the cleaners in his reading nook at the front of the store. And I want to point out here how excited we are about the accessible architecture of the entire site, which our brilliant web designer and developer, RJ Ramey, founder of Out Studios, created single-handedly. The entire site can be navigated by keyboard shortcuts, which we can see here by activating the shortcuts. And so, for instance, we can choose to go visit Sam by clicking the S key, and then we have the opportunity to confirm that decision by hitting return. And I'm navigating all of this through the keyboard shortcuts for folks who need that feature. So we can see here that we can visit Sam and ask him questions and explore his reading area to learn more about his story and his history. So at the bottom right hand of the screen, we can start exploring. We're taken through the film reel and landing into an actual scene from the film. that shows us where Sam hangs out each day. This is a still image of the film that we have given very subtle animation to create what we call a cinematograph. So we can start exploring Sam's cinematograph and note that some objects have a glowing feature to them. So such as the photo on the wall, the newspapers sitting here on the table, and then the wooden vases by the lamp. And when you hover over them, as you can already see, a magnifying glass appears and indicates that you can click to explore more. So as we click on the wooden vases, for example, we're asked to take a moment and think about this artifact, knowing that these vases were carved by Sam while he was incarcerated in camp in Poston, and consider, what does this make us wonder about camp life? Clicking on Look Closer, a pop-up box appears that connects the wooden vases to the educational and historical theme of surviving forced removal and incarceration. We have a paragraph here that explains this theme, and you'll note some of the key words in bold text with small question mark icons beside them that you can click on, and you can get a short definition that can also portal you out into a longer definition. At the top, we see 3 tabs: Read, Watch, and Look. And each tab has one or several primary sources that we've curated and organized together that inform the topic of surviving forced removal and incarceration. So if we click on the Watch tab here, we have an oral history excerpt from Mas Hashimoto. This was recorded back in 2008, where he reflects on his memories of arriving at Poston concentration camp. We're going to take a few seconds to listen to Mas now.
You know, you go from cool, foggy Monterey Bay to 100 and almost 120 degrees temperature. And I remember half the group at Parker train station, half the group had heat stroke. And, you know, but the guys from Lodi and Sacramento, okay, they're used to the heat, you know. We were not, you know. You can always tell who's from the Monterey Bay area.
I can confirm that. Everybody has been complaining about the cold, and you know we're coming from the Midwest, and so it's pretty fun to hear this. Sympathetic to you all. But exiting out of this hyper object, we can explore up the page, and there's other things to click on and kind of dive into in this cinematograph. For instance, this photo that's hanging here on the wall. We know that this is a representation of the character of Sam when he was a young man with his wife in their strawberry field in Watsonville. And this hyper object, when we click into it, represents a topic of farming despite barriers, where users can learn more about the legal, political, and social hardships Japanese people faced in the pre-war era, such as alien land laws and the anti-Japanese exclusion movement. So clicking on the Look tab, we have a photo gallery of the early 20th century images of Japanese people in this local area. So from Monterey and Watsonville, even over the hill to San Jose, which is where my family is from, who join us tonight. Some of you may recognize some of these vistas or these images. And you know, there's a lot here in Sam's cinematograph that we could continue to go through, but again, this is your invitation and opportunity to come and explore on your own. What I do want to do, though, is make a note that we have 2 other cinemagraphs. Scrolling the wrong way, don't worry about it. We have 2 other cinemagraphs that you can go and explore, right? One for each of our other main characters, Mary and Kimie, which each have just as much learning material in their own pages as well. So scrolling down, I'd like to share one more space with you. We can go and visit Kimie in her office. And now I won't go as deep into the primary sources that we've curated here, but I'd like to take a moment to note some additional accessibility features that really work to make the site practical and hopefully actually enjoyable for folks with disabilities. So when we start exploring Kimie's page, and again, I'll turn off the background music just for now, we have this option of going into higher contrast. And when I click on it, the image considerably brightens to sharpen that contrast and make it more clear for low vision folks. And in each cinemagraph, we can also activate, once again, the keyboard shortcuts. So you can scroll through the page by using your keypad, and then it is also available to navigate by screen reader. So if I click the letter Q to directly ask Kimie some questions about her life and history. This is a really fun and unique feature that we enjoy, this Ask a Character feature, because in it, we have a choice to ask the character about a number of topics, and they actually break the fourth wall and, as their character form, directly address the audience. So I'll give you a little taste of that here when we ask Kimie about her business.
I petitioned to leave camp early. At camp, I learned how to alter clothes. Nobody knew how long the war would go on, and I didn't want to stay in camp any longer.
And I'll make a quick note as well that we have the interactive and tracking transcript of each of these video files. So for folks who want to listen to a certain part of an oral history or a video transcript again, they can navigate through this text and be able to skip ahead.
Used all my savings and set up the store.
Okay. So we're just skimming the surface. I hope that's clear of all the accessible build out of this site. But if you are curious about this, you can always explore more about our accessibility tools. And then you can also click on the About Accessibility from our home tab here. And we have a long list written out by RJ about our goals, tool implementations, scrolling the wrong way again, challenges, tutorials, and our future sightlines for further development that we encourage you to explore. So, finally, given this audience, I would be remiss if I did not also highlight our For Educators space here, right? So I'd like to do that as a way to close. I must note that we have many facilitation and learning guides that we have created for this project. We have guiding inquiries that are embedded into each hyperobject to help learners and students make sense and connect the curated sources that we have organized together, and to be able to think about their own positionality and subjectivity in relationship to the history and power structures that we're all socialized into as we grow up. We also have many selections of different discussion guides that teachers can take advantage of depending on how much time they are allotted in their classroom. We have different learning activities that can be used at home or in the classroom as group work or individual work. We have a robust array of different kinds of resources available to people who want to do more research on their own. And then finally, given that this is Night at the Museum and there's many scholars here, I must, of course, show our Works Cited page. And so some of you will appreciate that this is uniquely organized in accordance to the design of this site. So it's not just alphabetical order. So you can really trace where the sources are. You'll see that we have several primary sources, of course, in each cinemagraph. We also have supplementary primary sources and secondary sources. So for the professors and scholars and researchers in the room, you'll be pleased to hear that we have over 200 different primary and secondary sources, all curated specifically just for this learning site. So with that, I will conclude your very quick tour with a very warm invitation and plea for you all to come onto the site and explore it on your own terms with, an open mind and heart, and see all of the wonderful and rich materials that we have curated and also the beautiful design of the site. So thank you so much for your attention. And Jasmine, I think I pass it back to you now.
All right, so does everyone know what a cinematic digital history project is now? too. So we're setting up right now. We're going to have a very brief, we've got run a little late, talk back, and we have a special guest here to moderate our talk back that I'd like to introduce. Celine Preñas-Shimuzu, Dean of Arts and Distinguished Professor of Film and Digital Media at UC Santa Cruz. Her 2020 film, The Celine Archive, has won several festival awards and is distributed by Women Make Movies. And she recently finished her new film, 80 Years Later, on Japanese American racial inheritance in 2022, which premiered at the Los Angeles Asian Pacific Film Festival and was just screening over the weekend at Films of Remembrance in San Francisco and San Jose. Her books include The Proximity of Other Skins, Straight Jacket Sexualities, and the Hypersexuality of Race, which won Best Book in Cultural Studies from the Association for Asian American Studies in 2009. So I want to ask her to join us on stage to moderate, and I would like my project team partners to come up too.
What a beautiful film. Thank you so much, Jasmine, for bringing this to our community. I have some questions. Jasmine, could you tell us a bit about why you chose to use this or create this cinematic digital history project as an educational model?
Okay, I'm going to answer very briefly because you've already heard from me, and I want to pass things down to my colleagues sitting next to me. I would say very briefly when Eugene, who's Jason's partner at Full Spectrum Features, approached me. He'd read my book, Moving Images, Photography in Japanese American Incarceration, and at first I thought it was a terrible idea. Because I'm a historian, so what would I have to say, or how would I integrate historical primary sources into a historically based but a fiction film? And then I got really excited about what it could be, what it could mean to work in this hybrid form, to create something new, but something that maintained both, I think, the kind of artistic vision of fiction film, at the same time that it really allowed us to dig really deeply into the history behind the events and the primary sources.
Thank you. Clara, as a PhD candidate in history, could you talk about the work you conducted for the project?
Yes, absolutely. So this project had many different phases. The first part of it for us on the research team was primarily just gathering a lot of primary sources that might be relevant. But at some point in collaboration with the film team and all of the people involved, we really started to focus on the characters. And so once Sam, Mary, and Kimie were sort of developed as these fictional characters, we really started to build out our primary sources just to try and tell their story. And as Ashley pointed out, right, we have hundreds of primary and secondary sources on the website, and those are only the ones we chose. We went through hundreds and hundreds of different sources to sort of look at, what would Sam's life have been like? What would his life have been like in Watsonville? What kind of communities might he have been a part of? So, we found photos like that strawberry farm photo. We found photos of all kinds throughout California and interviews and all kinds of things. And so it really became a character-based process where we tried to use these different three characters to tell many different stories from many different people who had gone through this process of incarceration and resettlement. And to really build that out, we kind of split the characters into three. So I took Sam's story, Kat, who's not with us today, took Mary's story, and Patrick, who is also not with us today, took Kimie's story. And so each of us sort of had this opportunity to really dedicate all of our time and all of our care to each individual character. And then the sort of process beyond that was really collaborative with everyone on the team. Every, piece of the website was discussed over and over again. Every piece of language, every source that we chose was something that was done through these conversations that were had between all of us. And everyone on this project cared so much about making an excellent, excellent piece of work. And so it was really, really a labor of love. And so, yeah.
Thank you. Jason, speaking of collaboration, So you collaborated with Japanese American communities in Chicago. Could you talk about that?
Yeah, sure. I think at Full Spectrum, what we're trying to do is avoid as much as possible being extractive of people's stories. So what that looks like is kind of a community engaged model of telling these stories. And at every step of the way, we wanted people who went through this experience or who had this experience in their own families to be part of the script writing and development process, to be on set even. There was I think maybe 10 or 15 people from the Japanese American community who were on our set the entire time, all the way through to distribution. And I think, collaboration can look many different ways, but when you commit to honoring those voices and really making them part of the process, it's harder. It's easier to just take a story, make a film, and be like, oh, this is what we did. But it's much richer if we can really involve those people and hear those voices and understand the humanity that we're trying to put on screen and that we're trying to put into the website. So that's really what I think we tried to do. Yeah.
RJ, website's amazing. And clearly you prioritize principles of accessibility. What makes making the website inclusive, challenging as well as joyful?
Gosh, there's so many things that make building an accessible website challenging. Mostly that many of us have not done it before. This is really a awareness of a lack of inclusivity that we've been ignoring forever. So I had to learn with the Full Spectrum team, how do you be cinematic if you're not allowed to use light and sound? So we really, in some ways, we're inventing other ways of letting people participate who won't see the wheel turning. So of all the job titles I have, I would call myself mostly a designer. And so we were designing interactions that could be experienced in multiple ways. And frankly, there were sometimes no other examples out there of how to do it. So we would just brainstorm and try stuff. And when that didn't work, we would try something else.
Wow. Last question, Ashley. What are your dreams for educators in using this film and this website?
I've dreamt a lot about this project, actually. I think that my dreams and my aspirations in short form would be to give an opportunity for all learners, whether you are in sixth grade or a junior in college, or whether you are an Issei and you are a Sansei, right? And you're at home and exploring this, to see yourself as a stakeholder in this history. So whether you are Japanese American or not, that if you feel far away from this history or very, very close and you feel it in the marrow of your bones, that you know that you can have a stake in this and that you can care, and that this story can also be a part of your story. And so I hope that we can have a relationship building process, I think, through education.
It's such a beautifully filmed, beautifully written, and just beautifully directed film. And I'm so sorry that the other folks who are in town can't make it. Thank you so much to my sister Dean, Jasmine, for including me. I know that Jason and I screened this film together in San Jose and San Francisco just this past weekend, and the subjects of my own film. It's such an honor to be with the JACL and the Japanese American community in Watsonville and Santa Cruz. My husband's family was also incarcerated in Poston, so it's just really wonderful to meet you all and remember what happened and preserve that history through the power of film and the power of emergent media in the website. Thank you so much.
We have a beautiful reception. There is some sparkling wine and sake being poured right now. I want to make sure you all know, in your programs, there is a QR code, and that's probably the easiest way to get you to Resettlement Chicago Story. It's a free, openly available resource, cinematic digital history project, and we really do invite you to explore it. Instead of taking audience questions, given the time, we want to make sure that you have time to eat and have time to go explore the museum, but we are here, and so please feel free to come up to us. And I want to thank you all for being here so very much. Thank you.